and I'm the Yale class of '74 Brantford. And I am very, very pleased to welcome you to the 14th Yale Career Panel today on consulting, the consulting profession. It has been a pleasure to do these. This started about 3 years ago as a way of trying to help students and young alumni get a sense of different careers, but get a really candid view of the profession, not just the positives and negatives. We have done a whole variety of professions, whether it's legal, medical, drama and film, education, entrepreneurship, nonprofits, etc. We did one on comparing consulting, investment banking, and investing on October 13th. And this spring, we'll have one on government service, and we'll also have one on information technology, so internet, software, and data. So I hope all of you will attend the ones that are most relevant to you. The whole reason for this panel, of course, is to try to take some experienced people from the profession who can tell you both the good, the bad, and the ugly, and in particular try to pierce some of the myths that exist about many professions. What we're going to do is we have the 5 questions that were listed in the invitation that you saw. We're going to go through those after a brief introduction, and then we hope to have 15 minutes of questions at the end. For those of you who are at Yale and those of you who are here in New York, you can raise your hand and we'll take questions from various people. Denise Burns, I believe, is in the room at Yale, and she'll coordinate questions from Yale. And those of you who are viewing via the streaming video, since you're muted and we can't hear you, you should send your questions to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com, which I'll be able to see here on my smartphone, and I will read questions as they come in. We had one eager beaver who actually asked a question an hour ago before the session started, so obviously some people are paying attention. So what I'd like to do, though, is first just introduce our 2 panelists. To my left, I have Latrice Ashford. She's a managing director at Accenture. We have something in common. We both have a BA degree in economics from Yale and managed to overcome that handicap. And to my right, I have Steve Cotter, who is a partner at Bain & Company, who had the misfortune of going to Vassar undergraduate, but then retrieved himself and went to Yale School of Management, so he's retrieved himself. So let me get started and just ask, before I go through the 5 questions, I'd like each of the 2 panelists to briefly just talk about how they got into the profession and sort of their career path.
Okay.
Trace, you want to start?
Sure. So thank you, Peter. So my name is Latrice Ashford again. I am based out of New York City here. I've been with Accenture for 16 years. Accenture Anderson Consulting at the time was my first job out of Yale, and I have been there ever since. You don't hear that story very often anymore. A lot of people bounce around. I happen to be one of those people that decided to stay. I run our analytics practice for North America, specifically for our public service clients. So that's all government agencies or higher educational institutions. I've spent most of my career kind of focused on data management, business intelligence, and predictive analytics. Many, many years ago, a lot of people weren't really focused on that or talking about it, but I thought that it was interesting. Maybe it was my econ degree, I'm not sure, that got me fascinated about data. And if you guys are familiar with this or not, over the last couple of years, there's been a real push and surge around digital and digital capabilities. So it's an exciting time, and happy to just share with you guys what I've experienced over these last 16 years or so.
Great, and as Peter said, I'm Steve Cotter. It's great to be here. I'm a partner in Bain's financial services practice based here in New York, and I focus mostly within that sector, mostly in the insurance space. But I work across capabilities, so across strategy and performance improvement and cost and customer experience and organization, et cetera. And I actually have spent time at several different consulting firms. I started at McKinsey out of Yale School of Management, and then actually went to Accenture for a number of years, and Oliver Wyman as well. So at some point when we get to the Q&A, we can, so I'm happy to sort of compare and contrast a bit as well. But again, I'm a big promoter of consulting. I think it's a great career path, whether someone's thinking about it for the first couple of years out of school or at any point for that matter, or making a career out of it as I have.
So let's get started. And one important point is obviously the entry point is not always the same. So if you're an undergraduate coming into consulting, or you're coming out of business school, or you come into consulting laterally from somewhere else, it can be different. So I think the people in the audience are probably mostly either undergraduate or business school, but there may be some young graduates who've been out for a couple of years as well. Can the two of you talk about that? Because it is different, right? You can't hear? Let's get Andrew.
There we go.
Can you hear us now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'll repeat the question. So the question is, what are the different entry points? Because it can be different if you're just coming out of undergraduate, or you're coming out of business school, or you're already working. So Latrice, do you want to talk about that?
I'll speak to the kind of traditional path if you're coming right out of undergrad. There are some instances where people will start other careers, maybe work in industry and decide to move into consulting. But typically how it works is you would start as an analyst, and I would say that Accenture is pretty rigid about how many years that you stay at each level. So you'll start at analyst, you'll move to a consultant. A consultant typically has more responsibility, where not only are you working for a specific client, but you probably are supervising a few other people on your team. You then will move to a manager, and managers within Accenture usually are managing small teams of people, or maybe responsible for a client by themselves. A senior manager, right, is someone who has all of the executive presence, so they're the ones that are interacting with whoever the sponsor is from our client on a day-to-day basis. They are not only kind of focused on making sure that we're meeting all of our deliverables, but taking care of the people that are on that project and making sure that we're keeping our commitments, financial commitments, not only to that client, but also to the firm. And then the last step is a partner or a managing director. So for each of those levels, you kind of stay 2 to 3 years, right? An analyst, you're there for about 2 years. A consultant, about 2 years. A manager, it starts to be more like 3 or 4. A senior manager, as you can imagine, there are a lot of people who have been at the senior manager level for quite some time. It could be 5 to 7 years. Once you're up for partner, it's really trying to figure out how are you contributing, meaning bringing in new revenue for the firm. And once that slot is open and available to you, then you could be made partner or managing director within Accenture.
But along the way, I guess people leave because obviously, since it's a pyramid, obviously not everyone ends up being a partner.
Yes.
So I gather along the way there are people who exit for a variety of reasons, right?
That's right.
Either because they're not good enough, or because they change their mind about their career.
That's exactly right. And I mean, there are lots of instances where maybe you have started your career and you're in one particular industry, like public service or government, and you have an interest in financial services. And instead of you trying to figure out how you navigate within Accenture to make that move, there are folks that will leave, maybe get an MBA, and then come back and be able to move into another industry group, and they could then come back as a manager or a senior manager, depending on what they did with those years away. So there are options, and there's different ways that you can go through that path. That's kind of the traditional path. But if you're one of those people that, somewhat impatient, right, and maybe feel like you don't want to have to follow those types of rules, you may make other decisions about how you want to conduct your career at Accenture.
Steve?
Yeah, I say, Bain is very similar, and I think most of the industry firms are relatively similar in terms of there's 2 primary sort of paths in. One is right out of college, and there's both a summer opportunity for folks entering their senior year and a permanent, so to speak, opportunity for folks in their senior graduating. The second is at the graduate school level, which is typically MBA, but it doesn't have to be. It could be other graduate programs, including law and PhDs and others. And there's a third, which is sort of a lateral for folks that have been successful in their careers in different industries, could actually move into consulting. And that's, I'd say it's less of a typical path than the other two. But there are certainly some consulting firms in particular really go after sort of lateral hires, in large numbers. But back to the points made, it's sort of an up or out, or in some firms it's sort of softer, maybe go or grow. Someone comes in and they need to sort of demonstrate their capabilities and the skills at that level. So at Bain, for example, coming out of undergraduate, one is an AC and an associate consultant for a couple of years, and then typically they go back to business school, but not always. We have a direct sort of promotion path to consultant. But typically out of business school, someone comes in, becomes a consultant for a couple of years, and then a manager, and then a principal, and then a partner. And across each of these different sort of tenure levels, there are different capabilities that one needs to demonstrate, starting with initially sort of a focus on the analytical and problem-solving skill set, towards moving towards managing different work streams, different Bain folks, and then client folks. And then as people become sort of senior managers and principals and partners, it's really a lot of the sort of softer people side really comes into being, which is not just the problem solving and the brainstorming, but actually, and the communication, but sort of working very closely, managing large teams of people with a client, and ultimately selling and sort of structuring work at the same time.
Let me go to a second question, and here I'm going to test whether you're willing to be candid or not. There is no profession that is perfect. I'm in investment banking. I will tell you it's not a perfect profession. It's got good things and bad things as a career, but also has good and bad things happening to the profession. Certainly, for example, when we had the last panel on legal, the panelists were quite honest and said, there are structural things happening in the legal profession that were negative. Fees getting cut, more competition, harder to get to be a partner, and so forth. So on that note, being honest about it, if you look about consulting as a profession, right, what are the things that are happening that are good and bad? Because I'm sure it's true that there are items in both categories. Latrice?
So I'll start with it just to be positive, and then we'll talk more specifically about some of the things that are challenging. I mean, for consulting, if you are the type of person that would like to see a lot of different things and get experiences across a multitude of organizations in different areas, it gives you the opportunity to do that, right? You're not just working for one company every day for a 10-year period. You may be with one client for 12 weeks to 3 months to 1 year, maybe 2 years, and then you're moving on to the next big problem that you're looking to address.
Actually, that's question 3, which is
Okay,
what
sorry.
for each person. No, I'm talking about the profession, which we'll get to. We'll get to that as question 3, as individuals. But
Okay.
as a consulting industry, as an industry, right?
As an industry.
What's going well or not going well?
Oh, as an industry, okay.
Right, exactly.
So, okay. So I apologize. I thought that was the individual. So what I would say about consulting is that it is highly competitive, right? What we were doing in consulting 20 years ago, I mean, the size of the companies were much smaller, right? You were talking about companies that had 50 to 60,000 employees, where now you're talking about large companies with 300,000 employees. And you have a whole lot of people that have been through the consulting ranks, right? So in a lot of instances where you're working with a client, they too have been consultants for 10 to 15 years and will challenge you to say, what exactly are you bringing to the table? I'm hiring you as a consultant. Is anything new or innovative that you're bringing? Because I can probably do a lot of the standard consulting type work on my own because I have that experience. That puts a tremendous amount of pressure on consulting firms because they're constantly having to reinvent themselves in a way that we didn't necessarily have to do before, not as quickly, I should say. So that's one challenge that I'm seeing. I don't know if you have a different perspective, Steve.
No, I agree 100%. 20 years ago when I started in this career, our clients, for the most part, didn't really have strong internal strategy functions or sort of internal consulting functions, and with maybe the exception of an American Express or a couple of real standouts. Today, it's completely different. Most large organizations actually do a fantastic job at identifying and attracting really good talent at schools like Yale, both at the undergraduate level and at the MBA level, and they're able to develop these folks, and they're really so the bar has gone much higher, let alone the consulting landscape with our clients themselves. And the question is, why you need to really justify those fees to really create impact in a way that we can't ourselves and really solve a problem. So I think to the points made, basically consulting firms are really investing heavily in IP, in really coming up with new ideas, in sort of creative thinking, whether it's around the Internet of Things and digital and analytics to organization effectiveness kind of thinking, to really help bring all these things together in creative ways to impact our clients.
But obviously things that the clients themselves may not have the ability to develop, for example, obviously for that reason.
Exactly.
That's right. What does cost? It's interesting because one of the wonderful things about doing these career panels is you get to see across different careers what industries seem to be doing well or not doing well. The impression one has is that the consulting firms as a group, right, are doing well. Is there a reason, and it obviously isn't because we have a booming economy, right? But is there a reason? Is it because there's certain areas that have become important that consultants have to fill, have to provide the services to solve?
I'd say, first of all, I think the industry is actually going through some changes, that there's been a bit of a shakeout. The industry is sort of not a monolithic. It's a very broad industry. There's sort of strategy firms. There's more sort of technology consulting firms. There's firms that really focus on one industry or one capability. So it's a broad spectrum of firms out there. And there's been a fair amount of M&A. A number of firms have been absorbed by others, as you probably have read in the papers, whether it's Booz or Parthenon or Monitor over the last number of years. So I'd say there's definitely a lot of action going on. That's sort of the first point. But I think one of the things that firms, particularly Bain and Accenture, bring is sort of a broad set of capabilities. So one of the issues with any one client is this sort of often sort of very focused and sometimes a parochial sort of perspective around this particular company. And what we do as a consultant is bring lots of different perspectives and ideas across industries and across sort of ideas and across geographies, of course. And that actually creates, we believe, creates a lot of value and impact. So the old John Stuart Mill, different perspectives create truth. We're big believers of that. And we really want to create, one of the things we want to do when we identify and attract talent is attract a very broad set of backgrounds and capabilities and interests, because we think that together is what creates real value.
So you're actually saying it depends upon the area, whether it's doing better or worse in terms of customer demand, right?
I think that's right.
I also think that by the nature of the work that we're doing, the fact that you're a consultant, we are naturally always challenged to think about problems in a different way. So it is very natural for us to be thinking strategically about where we want to take our business 5 to 10 years out. And if the senior leadership makes a decision about what changes we're going to make in terms of offerings and people alignment, to push that down through the organization is very easy to do. People get it, people adjust, and people roll with it. Where in other industries, sometimes you're just resistant to change. It's not part of your culture, where in consulting, you're just kind of used to these types of changes. So I would say if you were looking at consulting to say, can you thrive in this type of environment, economic environment, you can because of that change. But we are being stretched, I think, in a way that we've not yet been stretched in a long time, based on all the things that you just cited, Steve.
Let's move to this next question, which is very related to this issue of how the industry is doing good and bad. And many professions have myths versus realities. I think it's maybe a little less in consulting compared to law or medical, where TV shows glamorize the profession. Someone commented to me the other day that the number of people going into forensic science now because of NCIS, Los Angeles NCIS, New York, and Bones and so forth is way beyond the appropriate level, because they portray it as such a sexy profession. What do you perceive as, the myths and realities of the profession that you see? Latrice, we'll mix it up here and we'll start
Sure.
with her.
It's the classic being able to travel. Yes, it is exciting, and having the opportunity to see new cities and states, countries. People want to do that at one point in your career. I think that's very natural. But the reality of getting up on Monday morning at 3:30 in the morning to go travel to a client and work a full day, sometimes 7, 8 o'clock at night, and then be there away from home for a full week. Sometimes you're lucky you could do that Thursday and come home. Sometimes you have to stay until Friday, and then you're back on a flight, you're coming back home. You have really 2 days to do the stuff that you want to do at home. That includes spending time with family and your errands, and then you're back on a plane at 3:30 in the morning on Monday. Like that, there's a reality around the type of work that we do, that you travel to your clients. And for me, just speaking personally, I usually can do it and I can get into a rhythm, and I'm good for probably about 10 months, 11 months. And then all of a sudden I realize that I'm just exhausted. It's like the sleep isn't enough sleep, and the 8 hours doesn't feel like I need more like 12. And I think the travel in itself starts to take a toll on you, and you don't really notice it. So I would say the one thing about consulting, it is exciting, and I think it's important. I mean, I have the flip problem, actually, to be honest, is that because I've traveled so much in my career, when I think about instances where I'm just going to be local, I wonder what that will be like for me, because I've not spent a life like that. Then I say, will I then be bored and kind of want to get on a flight and go somewhere and see something else? Because your lifestyle is just different just by the nature of being a consultant.
I'll tell you a secret, which is if you're nice to Latrice, she'll give you 1 million frequent flyer miles as a gift. I just want to let you know that as a secret. By the way, your comment is very good. I know we do a lot of recruiting as an investment bank at Yale, and I remember 2 years ago we had someone who was a really talented person who said, well, if I'm trying to decide between consulting and investment banking. If it's investment banking, I've decided it's younger partners. If it's consulting, and it was another, but it was a consulting firm, well known, and they said, well, what's the attraction? It's we get to see the world, and Paris and London and so forth. And I didn't feel it was appropriate for me to tell them that they probably would see Kansas City for Monday through Friday. Or Topeka, because the vast majority of the clients are not in Paris and London or Honolulu, as far as I know, right? And I think that's one of the myths, right? This idea of travel being sexy and seeing the world. So that's the one you should really, think about. Don't press the recruiter too hard on it, but don't necessarily believe that you're going to see all these exciting, unless you love Kansas City, in which case it could be terrific, right?
Which it could be.
Steve?
Yeah, I'd say there's probably 2 or 3 sort of myths versus the reality that I want to focus on. One is, of course, the travel. It's not quite as glamorous as folks make it out to be. Even I remember early in my career, I worked on a cruise. We had an assignment at a cruise line, and we actually ended up being on the cruise for 6 weeks. And folks were super jealous. Meanwhile, we were like 4 levels down, counting sheets. Like it was not. We were not in the hot tub, with drinks. So it was, not all that exciting. But there's lots of travel, and and I think in some ways that actually is a positive. I know, for me, when I was right out of school, I loved the idea of travel, even if it was, Kansas City. Although a lot of it was international. But now, of course, with 4 kids, I do everything I can to be at home, in my own bed. But travel does consistently, stay with you throughout your career in consulting. So that is something that people should know about. It doesn't just stop at some point. The other couple of myths are, one is folks often think, oh, we're going to just basically be hanging out in boardrooms with CEOs. And there's obviously a fair amount of senior executive contact, because at the end of the day, we're hoping to solve major issues with our clients, but most of the work is actually rolling up our sleeves with frontline folks. Right. And we think that's really, it's all about changing behavior at the front line, and that's really what it's about. So if you're, we want to make sure folks are comfortable that they're not going to necessarily be, giving broad presentations, but actually literally be in a room like this down a level or, in a basement perhaps, with frontline folks that are, that are perhaps right out of school or whatever. So I think that's pretty important. And then the last thing is, it is really, the hours are long. So it's, I don't want to kid anyone. It's, we work, the hours for most professions are actually tough, I think, but it's no different in consulting. Most folks work pretty late into the evening on many days. And, we try hard to create a great work-life balance. But, just to sort of, shed any myth that it's sort of a 9 to 5 job, it's a pretty full job.
And I would encourage everyone who is either here in the room or listening, streaming video or at Yale, take a hard look at yourself and say, what kind of lifestyle do I want? What kind of person am I? Because if you're the kind of person who needs a lot of time, with friends and so forth, and it's a big problem for you to be away in Kansas City, 5 days a week, this consulting is probably not going to make you happy, right? And on that note, I mean, one of the things obviously that you hear a lot from people who are in consulting is just the fact that it's very disruptive to your social life, right? Or at least it changes the nature of your social life. Can anyone comment about that?
So I'll say one thing.
You're both married, so that's good, right?
Yeah.
It took me a long time to get there.
I actually spent my summer in between first and second year of business school in investment banking, and I found the one difference between the two sort of career paths, at least based on the 10-week experience there, was that consulting is actually much more predictable. So there are long hours, but typically if you're on an assignment, you'll know that next Thursday we have a big review due, a big report. So Tuesday and Wednesday are going to be probably late nights. But short of that, we could probably have a reasonable sort of lifestyle. And that you sort of know that in advance for the most part. I found that at least my experience on the banking side was it was much more unpredictable. I had to literally cancel lots of plans last minute at 7 p.m. because I had to stay real late. And that, maybe that was sort of, poor management on my part, but just a sense that in consulting it's pretty predictable. You sort of know what you're getting into in any sort of project. And that's a really great thing. So you sort of can own your own time in a sense. There's also very little, from my experience, and this is true at both Accenture and Bain, very little face time. You're sort of there to sort of do the best you can and work in a team environment. But if you need to sort of do it from home for a few hours during the day or during the evening, almost always that's very much, not just tolerated, but that's actually really celebrated at I think a lot of the really good firms.
I would just say that your social life is varied. And that's the only word I can come up with, is because when I am home, then you're trying to make the best out of the time that you are home. So, if I'm not traveling a week, I am probably doing something every single day of that week because it's my opportunity to reconnect with friends and colleagues because I know I might be on the road again. But then when I am traveling and I happen to be in the same city or town where another project's happening, or I happen to have a friend there, then I will be trying to make time with that friend there too. So, people would always say, well, what do you like to do? What do you typically do? And it's always hard for me to answer that question because every week is different depending on my travel schedule, depending on who I'm going to be with. And there's periods in your life, and that's fine, and that's fun, and it's okay. I just recently got married, so been working here for 16 years. It took a long time to get to that point, and I think it had a lot to do with the fact that I wasn't kind of pinned down in one location, so to meet, the significant other is a little bit challenging. And now it's still an adjustment because despite the fact that we both have very busy schedules and work really hard, you want to be able to spend time with your spouse. So, there's adjustments that you have to make there too. So I would just say that the social life could be there. It just is different than what it might be for, friends that you have that kind of stay locally for their jobs.
And you certainly shouldn't marry someone who expects you to come home every night. It's not going to happen.
That would be a little bit
That's right.
tough.
Latrice, one question is, we had a wonderful panel of doctors 2 years ago, and one of the doctors was a female doctor, had been out for 5 years, and she had a wonderful comment where she said, look, there's a difference between men and women. I love being a doctor, but let me tell you things you should be aware of that come with being a woman in the medical profession. And then she just kind of laid it out. She said, here are the pluses, so forth and so on. Do you have any comments with regard to, are there any, may not be, but are there any considerations that you would say, hey, look, if you're talking to someone who's female is thinking about saying, I just want you to know, good, bad, here's some things that you have to think about if you're a woman going into consulting, right?
So the good thing about consulting is that there are a variety of roles and types of things that you can be doing, but you have to be honest with yourself around what type of career and what type of life you actually really want, right? Accenture will make a role available to you if you are deciding that you want to be local, you're starting a family, or you have to be there with your kids. You can do that, and it may be local, but you may not have the same level of responsibility as someone else who has decided that they're going to continue to either stay on the road or work with a really difficult client that might require a lot of hours, but you have the choice, right? You have to decide what you want to do. For me, personally, I wanted to make partner. Like, I wanted to be an MD, and I wanted to have some ownership over my career at a certain point. And if I had decided to take other types of jobs, I may not have been exposed to certain things. I may not have had the same experiences, so may not have been positioned to be made a managing director at the point that I was prepared to do so. So that was the sacrifice that I made, because that's what I wanted for my career. Now, I'm at a point now where I do feel like I have a little bit more flexibility, and I've done what I feel like I wanted to do professionally. And I'm comfortable now saying, you know what, I've now decided I want to be local for the next few years because I'm going to, focus on family. And I know I have a network of people that'll do that. But I mean, for women who are working, period, you got to dig deep and kind of figure out what it is you want out of your life, because you will be presented with those choices on a regular basis.
Now I'm going to switch to the question that you started to answer earlier, which is, what are the characteristics of people who tend to do well and are happy in consulting? And I guess I'll merge it with the next question, which is, are there some patterns of people who, because you see a lot of people, right, at your firms, who just, is there some kind of generalization about the kind of people who end up, unhappy? I mean, it's clearly every profession, is different, and I think you pointed out a good point about investment banking, which I've been in for the last 25 years. Man, if you need to know what you're going to do every day, it is not the profession for you. On the other hand, it makes it interesting because, it's interesting because things come up. But if you're the kind of person who wants to know, that your day worked out exactly the way you planned at the beginning, it's just not the right profession. So you were starting to comment about, kind of people who tend to be happy, but maybe you can, continue.
I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction, because I'm finding it hard. I just don't want to generalize, because different people don't do well for different reasons. I do think the one thing is around stress tolerance. As a consultant, not only do you have your own personal stress, but you also inherit the stress of your clients and them being successful. Their success and their failures become yours. There was an article that was written in Harvard Business Review about how much angst consultants have because they carry around all this extra stress. And I know for me, I'm worried about my team. I'm worried about me. I'm worried about my leadership. I'm worried about my client. I'm worried about my client's boss. And if you're not a person that can handle that type of pressure and that type of stress on a regular basis, it will be very difficult to do this type of job. So some of it is, I can say that if you like to travel, and you like to be here, and you like new challenges, and you like problem solving, consulting's for you. But there is this other element of, you got to have a tolerance for a certain level of stress and pressure that allows you to be can't.
Steve?
Yeah, I agree. So I'll start with the folks that tend not to be successful. I think I agree very much. Folks that can't deal with ambiguity and uncertainty, because there's a lot of that in this job and in this career. So if you really don't have a tolerance for that, it's probably not a good path. Conversely, I think folks that tend to do really well, the folks that we like to see, are folks that are truly passionate about sort of having client impact, that love both the combination of the problem-solving, analytical side of the brain, if you will, and on the other side, the EQ and the sort of the people skills. And it's sort of that combination that actually, to me, makes a great consultant. Someone who's super smart analytically, who can really put all sorts of tough things together in creative ways. But at the same time, they actually know how to do that in a way that actually can get some buy-in and ownership with our client, and actually communicate very effectively, both verbally and in writing. So I think that combination, and folks that just have passion, those folks do really well.
And have empathy, right?
Empathy is
and
critical.
have
Absolutely
the
critical.
ability to see the world from the point of view of the other person, whether it's the people you're working with or your client, right?
Absolutely.
Because you could have be really, really smart, but just really blow it in terms of being able to figure out how to communicate a solution. Right?
Yeah, so those are the kinds of capabilities that, and sort of traits that we look for when we interview, whether it's on campus or elsewhere.
Okay. By the way, the one thing I can't figure out for both my profession and yours is there are all these TV shows about doctors, about lawyers, right? They're like a million lawyers, so forth. There's no TV show about investment banking, and I think there was one show about consultants, and that's it. So I'm kind of feeling there's something, I think there's some discrimination, don't you?
Absolutely. Although,
It doesn't have the Hollywood appeal, I guess.
One question I want to ask is, let me throw out, it's either something for you to react to, or it could be a devil's advocate, depending upon if you disagree. The good news about consulting is it's a reasonably well-paid profession, right? That people at the same stage of their career tend to do well, I think, right? Financially versus if they were sort of, the equivalent 3 years out, say, working in industry and so forth. Now that could be a good thing, but it could be a bad thing if in fact you're trying to move from consulting back out because people say, well, no one likes anyone who takes a pay cut, there's something wrong with them, right? But you get to be, relatively expensive compared to industry. Can you comment about that? Is that true, or am I just, I'm got the wrong message about this issue? Right?
I can take a stab
Sure.
at it. I mean, for me, so I have always worked with government clients or higher ed. It's very different, right? The pay structure for what I would be making as a government employee, of course, is very different than what I make as a consultant. My passion is I view myself as a public servant. I do. I mean, part of the reason why I've been able to stay at Accenture for as long as I have is really because of the work that I do and the fact that I've been able to help cities and states do things that maybe they couldn't do without, the expertise of a consulting company. That's exciting to me. But when I think about my future, right, if I want to continue to follow that passion, there will likely be a point in my career where I'll have to make a decision about, do you continue to do this and make the same salary and then some, or do you decide that you're just going to make an impact with one organization, maybe a nonprofit that would not command that same salary, and be comfortable with that. So it's true. Like, I could keep doing this and, and be okay and feel comfortable with what you're making in terms of salary. But looking at it at both angles where, I have a passion for human services, social services, I'll have to make that choice at some point. I don't know if that really answers your question because I haven't solved it yet. And I don't know if I ever will, but it is something that I know I think about just based on where I focus.
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, we often get asked, when we go to campuses, folks are often choosing between going into industry, into a company, or consulting. The third thing increasingly is starting their own business. And our answer is that in terms of the first, which is whether someone should join, a large corporate company or a consulting firm, is that the experience that one gets in consulting is so intense, and it's almost like 2 to 1, that if you would just spend 2 or 3 years at a Bain or at an Accenture or name another firm, one can go back into industry 2 or 3 or 4 years out at a much more senior level than had they gone straight out of college or business school and 4 years later been at a certain level, because of the growth and the sort of the learning curve. And we see lots of examples of that. So what's good about that is by coming in at a much more senior level through years at a consulting firm, the pay ends up being a lot better than it would have been, and it's comparable for the most part, increasingly comparable to consulting. In terms of the entrepreneurial angle, again, we believe that if someone were to spend a few years in consulting, they'll learn about the general management and business sort of set of perspectives and mindsets, and they'll be much more likely to succeed in a business if that they venture that they tried than if they started right out of undergrad or grad.
By the way, just commenting on entrepreneurship, I'm very fortunate to be in the mentor program at the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute. And the one thing's for sure is you can always sense when some profession's gotten too much hype. And I think entrepreneurism has gotten to be, quote, a fad. It is a great place for the right person who understands exactly what it, but it is become more popular than, shall we say, a realistic understanding of your likelihood to be successful in what kind. And I'm not being negative about entrepreneurism. I actually started a company myself, young partner, so I know what it's like and it can be very exciting. But it's like one of those things where where you have to really look at it carefully. A related question to this thing about salaries and so forth is, given that the vast majority of people who go into consulting end up doing something else before they retire, right? Where do people, I think you can talk about your respective firms, are the people who end up leaving Accenture or Bain before becoming a partner, or even as a partner, what do they end up doing typically? What are the kinds of things they end up doing?
Lots of entrepreneurs. To go back to your point, a lot of people go out and will start their own firms. I have noticed a lot of people will go out, start their own firms, keep them for a certain amount of time, either sell them or then decide to dissolve them and then come back into consulting. I have seen that. A lot of people who decide to go into industry and just, the one thing about consulting too is that you are coming in to advise, but you can't force change. So you can make a lot of recommendations and give a wonderful roadmap around what should be done in terms of a strategic plan, but the person that you're giving that to has to decide to move forward with that plan. That can be very frustrating for consultants. I've had periods where I've been very frustrated by that. And so there's times where you say, I'd actually like to be on the other side of the table and have someone give me those recommendations and actually see it through all the way. And you see a lot of people make that decision and go and do that work themselves.
Yeah, I would say there's probably three primary areas where people leave when they leave a consulting firm. One is, sort of corporate America, so, being a brand manager or a strategy person, often at an industry. A second is private equity. Particularly, Bain does a lot of work in the private equity space, so we have a number of folks that do leave to go into some combination of investment banking or more likely private equity. And the third is entrepreneurs. Lots of folks, it's such a great training ground for learning how to succeed and all the pitfalls of failure in business, large and small, that many folks do actually go out and try to start something on their own. And there are actually some great success stories that, that many consulting firms, could speak to of their alumni that actually have started, major organizations, both in the for-profit sector and in the not-for-profit sector.
But I will make one comment on that issue, and that is the people who are in service kinds of businesses, whether it's investment banking or consulting, you actually don't get operating experience. You're not actually running anything. So if you're managing consulting, but you're not running a business. And the one thing I want to emphasize for all of you is that can sometimes be a huge gap. So you leave consulting, you never run anything, right? You run projects, but that's not running a business. So you don't know how to do payroll or taxes or all these other things. So I would just caution that make sure that base is covered before you dive into it. The other, I think is one comment that you made about this issue of you're giving recommendations and so forth. I want both of you to comment. One of the things I hear very, very frequently of people who are either decide not to consulting or go into consulting and leave as they said, I'm not making anything. Right? I'm not making a product, right? Investment banking is a service business, but you're actually making a product. There's a financing, you raise the money, and so forth. So a little different. A company you make, you're involved with making a product, whether it's a cell phone or whatever. Can you comment on that? Do you think that's true, or do you think that's really an unfair comment?
I have a little bit of a different perspective because I do technology consulting where we actually do build products and assets that we leave with clients. So I get frustrated when I'm not building something and I don't have a team that's actually working on something that I can leave behind. So it's a little bit different. In my role now, it is more around sharing a point of view and giving a perspective and helping to connect dots. So it's less about actually building, and I kind of miss the building stuff at times. So that's a good point. But even when you're not doing technology work, even the way in which you shape recommendations and provide a roadmap and talk about next steps, to me, is still an asset. And it is not easy to organize. We don't, when you've been doing a consulting, and you might have a different perspective, Steve, but when you've been doing consulting for a long time, the way in which your mind thinks is just how your mind thinks, because you've been doing that work for a long time, where everyone doesn't naturally think. I have a girlfriend who always says to me, you think in bullet points. I tell you a problem, you put them in a bullet point, and then you go by each one of them. But that's how my mind works because of the work that I've been doing. And the deliverable, or the end product of that, to me, is something being built. That's just how I.
Yeah, and I would say that, Bain was started 40 years ago with the motto sort of results, not reports. The good news is the whole industry has moved aggressively in that direction over the last number of years. And most of the industry gets it now that, it's about impact. That's all. That's the reason we're brought in. It's not to have some, brilliant answer that's sitting on a shelf somewhere. So, which goes back to what I said earlier, which is really, and much of that requires frontline behavior change. So, I actually love consulting in large part because we actually do get to see the impact of it. At many firms, including Bain, we are actually often put our money where our mouth is. We put fees at risk around the impact, around different kinds of measures around that, whether it's, client satisfaction, whether it's employee turnover, growth, profitability, all sorts of different metrics, depending on what the goals are. But, more and more of, I think, of each of the different consulting firm work would be around actually, not just, some blue book, in a CEO office, but actually doing things, whether it's technology or actually, changing the manufacturing process, changing the decision-making approach of an organization, creating a customer-centric, set of whatever it is, very much so. And then just one point, Peter, I agree with you about what you said earlier about folks that leave often do go to a strategy function initially. So there are many CEO examples of folks that were in consulting and then sort of became a CEO or a senior executive, but typically the path is consulted and then some sort of strategy function and then from there they get to some line operating role. It's not easy to go right from consulting to a line operating role.
Now, I promised that we'd make sure we leave enough time for Q&A, and I do have some that are coming in, and we have 11 minutes left, so we're slightly behind. So what I'm going to do is open it up to questions, and let me start out if there's anyone here in New York who would like to ask a question, and if so, the only thing I ask you to speak loudly so that the mic picks it up. Is there anyone with a question here? Yes, there we go.
Can you talk about specific responsibilities of the analysts and the associates? Are they putting together pitch books, or are they reviewing? Could you kind of talk about specific responsibilities of both those entry levels?
So to repeat the question, he asks, what are the specific responsibilities of the junior level, particularly analysts and associates?
Sure, I can start. Folks get a broad set of experiences and capabilities within any tenure level. So right out of college, at Bain we call it AC, Associate Consultant, but every firm has their own name for sort of the initial set of consultant years. And those folks are really core team members. Typical consulting firm is sort of operated around a consulting team. So it's typically, let's say, 3 to 4, perhaps 5 full-time consultants. Usually in the case of Bain, it's, let's say, 2 ACs, maybe 2 consultants, a manager, and then some partner time on a given project. And that could obviously vary depending on the client and on the issues. And any one of those folks are actually doing a broad set of things. There may be heavy-duty competitive analysis, and modeling and Excel spreadsheet analyzing. There could be customer interviews or competitor interviews, which are more qualitative in nature. There's often lots of brainstorming, of course, with both within the Bain team or within the consulting team and with the client, more importantly. And then there's it's sort of putting all these kinds of analyses together to sort of create some ideas. So a typical sort of consultant is doing each of those things, not all the same day. Could be 2 weeks of doing heavy-duty customer interviews, going around the country to talk to suppliers, for example. And then a week or two to do some modeling, some spreadsheet, quantitative analysis, and then some brainstorming. So it's really a mix. And again, back to why the consulting experience is so rich. There's so many different capabilities that one is sort of learning and acquiring, just even in a short period of time over a 3 or 4 month project.
I would agree. I was going to call it more like a utility player. I mean, you are picking up a lot of different types of skills and tasks, and it might be process oriented, it could be technical. I think for most of my analysts, I will start them with a wide array of responsibility and tasks, but you're trying to figure out where their strengths lie, right? And if they have more of a technical slant, then you'll have them doing a lot of the modeling, analysis, and that type of work. If they, have a different, more process-oriented slant, then you'd want them to be conducting those interviews, doing some of the business process design work. But the goal is to figure out how your analyst can be like a utility player to support a full team.
But I do want to emphasize that there's so many different types of consulting firms.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's
And that
to
it
answer.
can really vary. I think they're answering quite openly from the perspective of the kind of firm they are, but there's some that can be radically different, where it's just purely a research type thing, where the research and data analysis, so the experience would be different. So I would just say they answer truthfully for their firms, but depending upon what kind of consulting you might pursue, the answer might be different. Now, I see a bunch of folks up in New Haven, so would anyone like to ask a question? And maybe Denise, you can choose the people who ask a question.
On that point, actually, you just raised this. I wondered if Ethan and Drew could say a bit about how they see the main differences between the consulting companies they work with, if they give some advice to us about choosing one that suits us best.
Do you understand that question?
Differences between kind of Bain and Accenture, or making the decision about what type of consulting you want to do?
Yeah, I suppose how the firms differ, from your point of view, having worked with them.
I mean, I think it's a hard question to answer, because I know for Accenture we have a management consulting arm that does strategic consulting, which would be similar to the work that we're doing at Bain. So, or there is a technology arm that Accenture has, which will be doing a different type of consulting, maybe competing against more like an IBM and some of those other competitors. So we have slices of that all across our firm. I think we've probably chosen, between Steve and I have chosen different paths. I've had more of a technical slant, where it's all been around how do we create technology assets for our clients. And that's worked for me. I was an econ major. I probably could have gone either route, but for whatever reason, I had an interest in the technology world. Part of the reason, I mean, you'll have to figure out what area you want to focus on. If you want to be more strategic in nature, then you should probably be looking at those types of firms, and try your best to talk to people that have worked in those areas. Talk to someone that's worked for McKinsey or Bain, and then have an opportunity to talk to someone that's working for like a PwC and IBM and Accenture, so that you can get a feel for what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and determine if that's something that you're interested in, would be my recommendation.
Now, I have a question here from Gerald Whitehead, who sent it in via email. By the way, those of you who are viewing the streaming video, you can send questions to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com. So Gerald says, I have a PhD in history, and I am interested in a future in consulting. Typically, do those with a humanities background struggle in their transition to consulting? So either one of you.
So I would say, we actually look for folks with, as I mentioned earlier, with a wide variety of backgrounds. I was an American Studies major, and the key is as long as someone has an analytical bent to them and really is comfortable with numbers and sort of with quantitative analysis, that actually is a prerequisite for most of the consulting firms, but not all. But as long as that's sort of as a sort of table stakes, we really like folks with, whether they're an English major, an art history major, or a physics major, they're all great. We don't really have a strong bias one way or another. In fact, we really do like different perspectives and ideas.
That's right. I would agree. I mean, we like the diversity in thought, right, across our team. So we don't necessarily want the same profile or everyone to have the same exact experience, because we're trying to come up with the best solutions for our clients, and that takes an array of experiences and backgrounds. So we too would be interested in that background as well.
Are there any other questions from Yale? You outnumber the people here in New York, so I'm going to favor you. No? Okay. Anyone here in this group? Yes, go ahead.
What are some of the big strategic issues that your clients are focused on working with you on right now?
So I'd say one issue that we're increasingly doing a lot of work in is the whole area of digital, and it cuts across industries, and the whole idea that consumers are increasingly, sort of demanding, instant, sort of, set of expectations, whether it's buying shoes or getting an insurance policy, or settling a claim right there and then with their iPhone. So we're doing a lot of really interesting, innovative work, which sort of combines leading edge technology and digital with sort of stuff that could be, turned practical. So the connected home, the connected car, the connected person, things like that. A lot of work at that intersection with sort of business processes and really transforming how basic business is done across different industries. That's one area.
So just to piggyback on that, it's also very important for government too, because most government agencies are trying to figure out how to provide better services to their citizens and constituents, and most people don't want to just pick up a phone anymore. They actually want to be able to go through the web and be able to interact in different ways, so that the digital agenda is very important. The other thing for us, because I work in government, right, the Affordable Care Act has been a huge deal for most states.
You didn't design the website.
I did not design the website.
Oh, good. We're very happy to hear that.
That's fine.
That was a trap. There's huge legislation that's been passed that, states have to operate differently, and folks are being able to have more benefit than they could have in the past. And there's this convergence that we're seeing between health and social services that we hadn't seen in the past because of things like Medicaid expansion. So,
any questions from the Yale crew? We have a very large, quiet group. Oh, there's a hand. Okay, go ahead.
So my question is for Steve. So I've noticed that you work in Candid and as well as Bain. So what were the differences between the two firms? And the second question, if there's time, why did you decide to stay with Bain long term?
So, first thing I'll say is, I have a ton of respect for all of our competitors, and I think there are actually a lot of great consulting firms out there. So if you guys are in terms of in a point where you're looking in the industry and thinking about a career, good news is there's not one firm that's the right answer. There are lots of firms. McKinsey is a terrific place, as is Bain. I'd say that the culture is probably what differentiates the two firms. Bain has a very unique, a very special culture, I would argue, that really sort of celebrates sort of developing each person to their fullest, but at the same time, and celebrates their individuality, but at the same time creates a really unique sort of team environment and team spirit. And it's hard to replicate that. And I think, we've spent a lot of time and effort on that. So everything from the way our training, it's both sort of formal training, so every 1 to 2 years, folks are literally sent off for a week somewhere around the globe, where partners are actually training them with cohorts from around the world. So it's become sort of a global group of folks that folks always stay in touch with. To ultimately, it's really an apprenticeship job. So we do a lot of on-the-job training. So literally each time we go to a client with the team, on the way back, catching the subway or the plane or the taxi, we do what we call curbside chats and literally give direct, immediate feedback. You did this really well. You could have done this, and it's I get it, I give it, etc. And it's great. It's sort of this culture that we're constantly trying to become better as a firm and as individuals. And I think that it's sort of Bain's pretty entrepreneurial. It's only 40 years old, so that's sort of a big part of it. But again, I think that whether it's McKinsey or Accenture, or Deloitte or name other firms, they're fantastic firms, and my sort of advice is to get a sense of the culture of each of the firms that you're thinking about, and a sense of how they really take developing people, how they take it into reality, and how comfortable you are in that environment.
I must say something, which is I started at Bain & Company in 1978 when I came out of business school, and there were 25 people.
Wow.
One of whom was Mitt Romney, and I stayed for 7 years, and at the end of 7 years, we went from one office and 25 people to 800 people in 5 offices, and now it's a lot bigger. So I must say the ethic was quite different then. But I'll tell you one short story, which was, although it was a very analytical firm, Bill Bain always said, analysis doesn't always get the answer. And I remember we were hired because Monsanto was in the polyester business, and they were losing $1 million a week. And they said, and the people running the business said, don't shut us down because we've invented polyester that is exactly like cotton. And they did these tests, various tests about elasticity, water absorption, and whatever. That said this is exactly the same as cotton. And I remember I was in charge of the project, and I said, well, look, I'm not going to beat a technical guy with all these different tests with machines that pull and so forth. So I did a simple thing. I sent 10 consultants out to 10 malls, set them up in booths, and had people go through and just feel and said, which one of these things is cotton? And it was like, I remember Bill Bain said, this is the goofiest project design I've ever heard of. It's like, no. I said, but it'll answer the question. And by the way, we gave people $5 at the end after they felt it. And it absolutely showed that the American consumer knows exactly what's cotton. And they said 90% of them said this is not cotton, and 95% identified cotton as cotton. And so in the end, we shut down Monsanto's polyester business. But I remember Bill Bain said, I thought we hired you for your ability to do data analysis and so forth, but this is the goofiest thing. But at the end of the day, it solved the problem, right?
Right.
And that was a day when, in fact, you were allowed to find just, if you had a solution to the problem, didn't matter what it was, they said it was fine, right?
Right. That's fine.
Any last questions from anyone here at New York or at Yale? If not, I want to first of all thank our 2 panelists, who I hope you agree did what they were supposed to, which is to be candid and so forth. And I want to thank everyone, both up at Yale and here in New York, and those who are participating by streaming video. I hope this was helpful to you. And again, we're going to have one on government service in the spring, and we're going to have one on information technology. So we'll anyone who's attended any of these will automatically get a notice. So we hope to see you there if you're interested. So thank you very much. And by the way, those of you who are in New York, the panelists have agreed to stay for another half an hour and answer any questions you may have. So thank you very much.
Okay.